Why is that black? Because it was unplugged. Do it. Oh, I don't know what that's going to do. We might just have a black screen for today. Well, I don't have time to debug that right now, so camera's definitely on. It's just not doing anything. Anyway, well, it was better than nothing, I guess. Better than the other way, which we've had before. Just video. We'll just merge these two.
Yeah. We'll put a postcode as reference to the last one.
There you go. All right, so welcome to week 2 of Orthodoxy 101. Like I said before, this is going to be a tour of the sanctuary, so we'll start over there. I just wanted to say really quickly, in the past, and for well, the better way to say that is for the other sessions of this, I try to speak for a little bit and then give you a lot of time to ask questions. This is going to be pretty much the entire session. So ask questions when you have them. Don't feel bad jumping in if you want clarification on something, or if something is of particular interest to you. Just jump in whenever. Otherwise, there won't be time at the end. So just jump in whenever. All right, to the narthex. So I start the handout on narthex, but actually, if you go to, for example, some of the monasteries on Manathos, you will find that there is sort of a church space even before you get into this, which is called the narthex, which I think the Greek word is like exonarthex or something. shouldn't. In our current setup, we don't really have a better spot for children, and they're often kind of kicked over here. And so, well, I know, but then my point is, then because they're children and children make noise, sometimes other people will come and also make noise. Ideally, no. I mean, kids are going to make noise. That's not the problem. But the other conversation going on probably shouldn't be. But the other thing to say is that different cultures around the world treat Orthodox churches very differently. So there are some where, unfortunately, they have not taken the word of St. Paul very literally about shutting down the church. And they will just have full-on conversations in the back of church. Thankfully, here in America, that's very uncommon. You would absolutely get church or kicked out by someone probably, hopefully politely, but still, if you were just blabbing away in the back about your week or whatever. Ideally, this should be treated like church, with all the respect and keep track of the service that you would be doing over there, you're doing here as well. Questions? Great. All right. So we'll go through the pretend rollers into the nave. I like to ask people, what is the nave? What does that mean? It's a root you know.
Center, navel. No?
Not quite.
Okay.
It's a simple sounding word, but there's another word used very commonly that has the same root.
Mention.
Alright. No. Nave. Yeah. Ships, boats. Pretty common to hear the saints use language talking about the ark of salvation, all on a basically all on a boat together, and we all have jobs to fulfill to keep the boat afloat and going where it needs to go. So we call this the nave. Obviously, most of the time in services today, and pretty much any Orthodox church will ever go in, this is where people stand. You will notice that ours is missing something that's very common in other church denominations. What is that? Yeah, no pews. Why? We do stand a lot, and we do a lot of prostrations. Yes. So to circle back, so our position of prayer is not kneeling like you find in some places. It's standing. That's why we stand in our services. So we don't need to have chairs everywhere for people to sit in. And yes, we do prostrations all the time. They are less common in evening services, so you don't really see them in the vespers here. Although we will when we get into Lent here in a little bit, if you're able to come still for the Lenten vesper services, you'll see me do a good number of prostrations at the end of that service. And during weekday liturgies, although again we don't do any of them anymore. We used to. I'd like to do them again, so maybe we just make it harder. We meet here on weekdays. It's hard, but then you would see us doing a number of prostrations during those liturgies as well. Very hard to do prostrations with a piece of wood right in front of your face. So, also, it's not strictly speaking the reason, but one element of not having pews is that it also makes it much more reasonable for children to be in our space. Pews are a challenge for kids to be kids. And as you may be well aware, we baptize our infants, they're full members of the church. We expect them to be in church the whole time. Though there are some, unfortunately, there are some Orthodox churches that have prayer rooms. They're generally not what we do, and we generally try to get rid of them if we have them, or make them be something else. The kids should be in church. So not having pews is a way to allow kids to be kids and to be in church. So. As you can see, we have icons, people venerate them. There's places for people like candles, it's very common. People say prayer in front of an icon and then light a candle there. We have the lamps that we light around the different kind of groups of icons that will vary a little bit depending on the particular parish and how they're able to set it up in here. This is a historical building and not a permanent home for us, so we made the decision not to paint icons directly onto the wall because hopefully we won't be here forever and we'll go somewhere that we can make a little more, not having our eyes off to the side and that kind of thing. So we just hung icons, but if you go into purpose-built churches, you'll see that see that it's in the shape of a cross. And there are two little wings, those are where the choirs traditionally would be. Of course, we don't have that here either. But yeah, I think that's most of the name. The choir is always somewhere in the nave. The clergy will be either in the altar or here, depending on the services. So sometimes, especially the evening services, you'll see clergy hanging out here for a while before going back in. Clergy are mostly up front. Questions about the nave generally?
So I guess the congregation would be standing 15, 16, 17 around that area.
Sure, yeah.
What is that? Sedicea?
Yep.
So are those like deacons or something? Or?
No, they're just, we've got chairs along the edge. It's just a fancy carved wooden chair.
I see.
It's more of a monastic thing. They have a seat that can be raised that is designed for you to lean against, so that when you're in your 12-hour monastic service, you can just hang out there, or you can put it down and sit all the way. They're fancy and expensive, and heavy to ship. So, and they're just not as common in Russian tradition to begin with, except in monasteries. We've got chairs, that's our equivalent, and benches that go around. So if you need to sit, of course you can. I guess I should say that our position for standing, but if you're infirm, elderly, injured, whatever, it's absolutely okay to sit. It's not like it's a problem, it's going to keep you out because you're sitting or anything. We do provide seats. But the expectation is that you're able to stand for as much of it as you can.
So this is a Eastern, more Russian context, you say? Or
Being in a temporary-ish space as we are, this is honestly pretty representative of any jurisdiction in the Orthodox world. There might be some minor variations in some things between, I think this is the Greek church's thing. Greek churches which tend to have chairs set out a little more, but honestly, as this is set up, this is pretty representative of any Orthodox church you can make into. I mean, some things like having the cross over there, that's a fairly Slavic thing. The memorial table there, you don't find that as much in Greek churches. But broad strokes, fairly
okay.
representative.
Right. Thank you.
All right, the other thing that you probably noticed right off the bat, which we've already briefly mentioned a few times, is icons. So we put them everywhere, ideally. It's hard to put literally everywhere in a place like this, but we do our best to put them up as much as we can. There's a lot of theology around icons, so I could spend a whole class talking about them, but just to very briefly touch on them. Hymns and the writings of the many saints that talk about them refer to icons as the windows into heaven. When we venerate them, of course, it's not the wood and the paint that we are venerating, and we're certainly not worshiping. The wood and the paint, that's not it. It's the person, and the person only because they are, as everyone is, an image and likeness of God, except that we say that the saints are saints because they did the will of God, they lived a holy life, and so they allowed that image and likeness to shine the way that some of us maybe don't as much. And so we remember them, especially some of the North American saints, which are these ones behind us, people often have very deep connections to and love them very much. So saying first is very common, but so is the same for all the other ones, especially patron saints, people often have a very deep connection to. It's also a reminder that even if there's very few people in the services, like Sundays, evening vesper services that we do, we're never alone. We're always, as I have here, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Jesus is not God of the dead, but of the living. Right? So we know that when we die, we don't actually die. We don't go away or disappear. We're you'll see people that just carry their kids around and kind of talk about the different icons to the services to help keep them focused on something more useful than streaming kind of off without annoyed or whatever. And it helps, I can talk all day about St. John Chrysostom, but that doesn't mean much until you have a picture of it in front of you and you can look at him and see what he looked like. At least in a stylized form, but still. The icons actually do a fairly good job of keeping the likeness. If you, for example, look up a picture, because we have actual pictures of St. John, you see that the icon looks pretty similar. Clearly, definitely still him, even if the style is a little different than photograph. Alright, I think we already said all that. The last thing just to highlight is, it's written here so you can cheat if you want, but saint, what does saint mean? Holy. Just holy. Yeah. So it's very funny when people say holy saint, whatever. Holy. English is one of the only languages to my knowledge where we have a different word to describe a person than just general. So if you look on icons that are written in Greek, it'll just say agios, which is the Greek word for holy. It's the same word that's used in the service when they describe things as being holy, and it's the same thing they describe a person. Holy and then the person name. And same thing in the Russian icons in Slavonic, they'll just say syati, which just means holy. And it's the same thing, Sveti Božja, holy God, Sveti Krepki, holy mighty. Same thing that's used in the service as is to describe the people in the icons. Just holy. So saint just means holy. Alright, I'm going to pause for a second. I'll describe a little bit of the icons that we have in here, and I want you to go use your legs and look at some of them. So, starting at the front, we have the iconostas. We'll talk about that later, I promise. We'll get there. But for now, in the middle of the church, we always have the icon of whatever it is that we're celebrating or commemorating. During these weekday services, I have what's sometimes called like a Manean icon. It's all of the saints for the month of January. So if you go look, you'll see there's little numbers for each day and tiny little images of all of the people that are commemorated on every day. The rest of them are back there. You can see all 12 months. I've already talked about the big ones on the top as icons from the New Testament. We have a collection of icons of the Theotokos that have been wonderfully donated from different people, St. Mary Magdalene. We talked about the Old Testament saints out there, so you know about that. I've already mentioned these are the North American ones. In the back, right above the computer there's 3 saints, and on the other side of the Medina, 4th. Those are all saints associated with choir, singing, hymnography, etc. I have yet to figure out what that collection of icons is supposed to be. And then this one is all of the founders of this church. I mentioned before people have a connection to their patron saint. So when you become Christian, when you become Orthodox, we take the name of some saint. Mine, Damien, is St. Cosmas Damien on November 1st. So everyone that founded this parish put an icon of their patron saint there, so that's that. And then here on the stands, we have obviously Christ and the Theotokos on either side. We have St. Herman, St. Nicholas, as in ho ho ho, that's St. Nicholas, and St. Sebastian, another North American saint. So please take a second and look around at some of the icons, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I especially, again, recommend looking at the Manean icons because they're very interesting. I just did. Great. Thankfully not.
Well, at least you didn't mess up your toe there, Father.
No. Although, I may have actually completely broken it, which is cool.
Oh, man.
Well, worst case. Okay.
Here we go now.
Reset this. And If you have questions about any of the North American saints, I also recommend taking a peek through some of those. All saints that shone forth in the American lands, from Alaska all the way to East Coast. Many of those saints are from this area, or at some point in their time served here. Saint Olga at the bottom is the most recently canonized of the North American saints. Her canonization was finalized this last summer, so a very new saint.
Yeah, it's not to find that one icon you were talking about with one of the saints riding the helicopter.
I'm pretty sure it's Saint Herman, but I'll look for it.
John?
How do they decide who becomes a saint?
It's a good question, yeah. How do we decide who gets to be canonized? The reality is it isn't really a single decision. The church simply confirms what is already being done by everyone. So for St. Olga, for example, people were venerating her as a saint from shortly after she died through when they canonized her, and the people following her, commemorating her as a saint, grew, and so eventually the church kind of explored it and looked at her life and determined, yes, this is a good person. And so then we have one final service where we say the last memorial, like funeral kind of service, and then we switch over to asking, we pray for her repose, and then we switch over to asking her to pray for us. And in that service, there's usually an icon that's been made and a selection of hymns as we sing in our Vesper services that are set up for that service, that are then distributed to all the churches to use. So
I have a acquaintance, she was healed through Matushka.
yeah, that's part of what helps the following grow. Yeah. Yes. All right. Any other questions about icons, saints, etc.? No. All right. Very briefly then, this is the choir here behind me. As you may have noticed in our services, we sing or chant in a kind of sing-songy voice everything. We never just flat read things like I'm speaking at you now, for the most part. There are some exceptions to that, but the vast majority of the time, sing everything. We don't use instruments either, so you'll never see an Orthodox band stashed somewhere in the building. We use the only instrument, the perfect instrument made by God, which is the human voice. It is a mixture of everyone, men, women, children, old people, whoever is capable and willing to sing, and therefore it is kind of an extension of the church as a whole. I will note that if you look at some of our service books, they will properly state that the deacon or whomever priest says some petition and the people respond. So the choir is singing on behalf of everyone. It is acceptable if you've been here for a while to sing quietly with them, not so much that you're distracting, especially if you're not much of a singer, the people around you. But they are singing on behalf of everyone, so very much normal to hear people kind of singing along with the choir a little bit. Again, not loud enough to be distracting. We don't want the choir and so-and-so yodeling over there, but okay to follow along. The singing is also educational, kind of like the icons. I highly recommend, if you aren't, to actually listen to the words that are being said, because the hymns are specifically catechetical. They tell of, so like today we did the service for St. Isaac the Syrian. It tells about his life. It explains why he was an important person, why we commemorate him. If it's one of the feasts of the Lord, like we just had Nativity not that long ago, or Theophany, the hymns will talk about why this is an important feast, why it's important for us to remember and to celebrate this feast today. So listen, don't just kind of let the music wash over you and whatever. Like, actually listen to what's being said by the choir. Our music may sound very different than what you're used to hearing on the radio or whatever. And one of the biggest reasons for that is because our music is very specifically designed to carry and support the text. The text is the primary driver of the music, not the music, and the text is just kind of also there. So even when we do things that are a little bit more composed, that are a little bit grander in scale, they're still there primarily to support the text, not the other way around. That's why it's got the longer phrases as we try and fit in the important words. So again, listen, it's important. The choir is trying to teach you things, so listen to them, follow along if you can. All right, any questions? I think that. All right, so we'll move on to some of the things in the front. Iconostas, this wall at the front, it can look different in different parishes. This, as I've said a few times, is a converted space, and if this was set up before, that was literally a stage. And so it had its little normal entrance thing, it had stairs up and a curtain that would go across. You don't need that, so it's been set up this way. In a space that was designed to be a church, and as you see on the back here, as it sort of indicates, the iconostas is usually only a partial wall, not utterly sealing off the altar space. It's not meant to be a completely separate space. It is more just the fact of this particular building that it has to be shut off like that. But it should be very much connected and a part of the rest of the church space. Sometimes people complain that the iconostas blocks their view, that it hides things going on back there. The reason for the iconostas is actually to highlight, to focus your attention on the place where it matters. As you've maybe seen if you've watched streams or been able to come to our services, that there can be a lot happening to make the service happen. And so there's usually a team of people behind the altar bustling around to make sure that things are where they need to be at the right time. That's not helpful for anyone to see. You don't need to watch people shuffling around and lighting candles, reading the censoreti, or getting ready for the next entrance or whatever. That's not an important thing to see. And so this serves to kind of block out the noise and focus you on the thing that matters, which is the altar and the consecration of the gifts and the liturgy, or the reading of the gospel, or whatever it may be that's happening. All of that stuff happens in the middle of the church. And so that's where your focus is hopefully pushed towards, the middle of the church. On it, of course, we put lots of icons. These are somewhat standard. You will always, every church ever, will have Christ on the one side and the Theotokos on the other. You will never have a church that doesn't. The doors, the next two with the little knobs, are either the angels, as we have them here, or sometimes the deacons, which are what we have on the other side, St. Stephen and St. Lawrence. That depends somewhat on the tradition in the particular parish, so you'll see different ones. It's very normal to have St. John and the patron of whatever parish you're in. So St. John Chrysostom, depicted here in a this is a very Slavic, as you were asking before, a very Slavic icon of St. John, depicted with the wings and his head, two heads, his head on him and also on a platter.
That's the forehead.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep. You can kind of read that's what it says in the text there, yeah. And then the patron on the other side, St. Christine of Tyre, is our patron saint, so there she is over there with her relic. That's what's on the little table in that metal box. There's a relic of hers in there. You are welcome if you want at any point to go venerate that relic. It's just up there to kind of keep it out of the way a little bit. But there, if you have a really wide iconostas, sometimes there will be saints from the particular land. So here are some of those North American saints you might see up there. Sometimes you'll see an icon of the patron saint of the person who donated the money for the iconostas or something like that. In our case, it isn't terribly wide, so this is what fits. The row above can vary a little bit as well. It's very, very standard to have the mystical or Last Supper there right above. It's very common to have that row either be the great feasts of the church, so starting with the Nativity of the Theotokos, the Exaltation of the Cross, entry of the Theotokos in the Temple, the Nativity of Christ, the Theophany, entrance of Christ to the Temple, it's got even one above. So you'll see in huge churches with iconostoses that are very tall, they'll sometimes have 3 or 4 or 5 rows of icons. I think there are rules about what's common to see there, but that's beyond anything I've ever had to care about. Just know that you can have multiples. Ours is not big enough for that, so we don't have that.
It's the impact of the heavenly rules.
Yeah.
Assembly of the saints.
And then it's very normal on the doors or somewhere around here to have an icon of the Annunciation. So on ours, the beautiful gates, as I called out the more technical term before. In the middle, you've got the angel on one side and the Topos on the other. And then also very common is the evangelists. So that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the little circles. Yeah. Questions about any of that? Is that everything I wanted to cover? Yes. Oh, the other thing to highlight is that in the Orthodox Church we veil holy things. So you may have noticed when you come out with the chalice and the discos, the things that have what will eventually become the body and blood of Christ, they're covered, they're veiled. We keep the high place in the altar veiled most of the time. And in fact, it is almost the exception that it is opened for various parts of the service. In the practice that I was taught, this varies quite a bit from church to church, but the opening of the doors is tied specifically to when I have to go through them, otherwise they're closed. People get curious about why they open and close. They open when I'm going to walk between them, and they close every other time. The curtain is usually closed. In liturgy, it opens for most of the service, but it closes a few times. Those times are when the clergy are doing things that are not really something you all need to care about. One of them is there's a point in the service where the clergy are explicitly called to greet each other and give each other the kiss of peace. It's a wonderful practice, not an important thing for everyone to be watching at that point in time. That's kind of in the leading up to communion, and it's just a lot of bustle that isn't prayerful if you're not involved in it. The other time is right before communion. It's closed when the clergy are communing. Again, it's a lot of bustle as people are moving around, coming up to the altar, taking the body, going around to the other side, taking the blood. And so the curtain is closed for that. At that point in time, you all should be in the whatever final stages of preparing to receive communion. And the last thing you need is to just watch people do a little liturgical dance, so to speak, around the altar a few times. It's just not helpful or beneficial for anyone. So we close the curtain at those points in time to keep that, to be away so it's not distracting.
Okay, I always interpreted it like it's so holy that we shouldn't see it.
No,
It's just basically not
it's
to
practical
show.
more than anything else. Yeah. The other thing that there is a theological significance to, though, right as communion is coming out, the curtain is thrown open, the doors are thrown open, and the chalice comes down to the people. There is a significance to that. What happened when Christ was on the cross? Right as he died, the curtain was rent in twain. Yeah, that's the curtain. The curtain in the Holy of Holies, if you look here on the back, there is a very thick curtain, which is where all of the blood from the blood sacrifices is sprinkled constantly. I cannot imagine what that curtain must have smelled like. And that curtain was what was rent in twain. That curtain was the thing that separated the dwelling place of God, the resting place of God, from the people. And in the enfleshment and the nativity of Christ, he comes and is with us. And in communion, he comes not just to walk with us, but to become part of us. And so that curtain is again thrown open to remind us of the lack of separation between us and God now. We can come directly to him. Sometimes people like to point to the Catholic Church and even by extension the Orthodox Church and claim that claim that the only way to God is through a mediator of the clergy. Communion is the very definition of that not happening. You come directly to Christ and receive him directly from the chalice. You receive Christ into yourself. Alright. I'm going to sneak around real quick and open the curtain, but I want you all to during those readings, as a sign of authority, the one who sits in the midst of the congregation is the authority figure, so he sits and then he stands. Theoretically, he would be seated to preach as well, but practically speaking, that's not really something we do anymore. But that is that. On either side, we have icons of, I think it's Peter and Paul here, and above an icon of Theotokos. If you look at this, this doesn't really show up very well, but you can kind of see in the back of the altar, it is curved. The other reason that the iconostas is usually only half of a wall is so that you can see the usually very large icon of the Theotokos. Large enough that she would usually be the first kind of person or thing you see when you walk into the church, is the Theotokos at the very front looking back at you from above the altar. Again, a reality of our space that's not something we can do, but we do still have it up there. We also have on either side at the top icons. Can you tell what those are of?
The ten lepers?
No, that's a good thought. Those are the disciples.
Oh, they're lepers.
Apostles, yeah. What is Jesus doing? Can you tell? He's giving communion. So on the one side we have the distribution of the body, and on the other side the distribution of the blood from the chalice. That's what those two icons are. We also have in the back two icons of the theologians, the saints that wrote the liturgies we use most commonly. So St. Gregory the theologian on this side, closest to that, to the back of the church, wrote the liturgy, or recorded at least, the pre-sanctified liturgies we use on weekdays in Lent. St. Basil the Great, next to him, wrote or edited the liturgies that we use all through Lent on Sundays and a few other times through the year. On this side, St. John Chrysostom, furthest in front, is the liturgy we use most of the rest of the time. Sundays, feasts through the week, through the rest of the year, most of the time. It's his liturgy. And the last is St. James. According to our tradition, his is actually the source of both St. John's and St. Basil's liturgy. They edited his down to be more accessible to the masses because it was quite long. It is uncommon for the liturgy of St. James to be done today, but in places where it is, my understanding is it lasts like 3 to 4 hours. So wonderful if you're able to do that, but challenging if you've got little kids running around like we talked about earlier. We have also standing just at kind of the foot of the altar table, the cross and the two fans. I think the fans sometimes get misinterpreted. They're not for me, they are for the gospel and for the gifts when they are instead on the altar. When they're brought out for the reading of the gospel or something, it's not for me, it's for the gospel book. Fanning the king, not me, who honestly doesn't really matter that much. And the cross, I hope it's obvious why we put the cross everywhere, but we do put the cross everywhere. So,
Is the sun, are the fans the sun and moon?
the fans, as we have them at least, are the cherubim, seraphims, two they cover the faces, two they cover the feet, two they fly. So, yeah, that's a pretty common image you'll see of just a face with 2 wings on top, 2 wings on bottom, reaching to the sun. It's one of those very silly recent images of like biblically accurate angels that are odd to us because we always draw them looking not like human. I mean, some of them look like humans, the ones that came in human form, but they certainly don't all look like that. Questions on any of this? It's a lot, so.
And then is that like a menorah then, the seven? Oh, is that from Revelation?
Yeah.
Revelation, 7 churches or 7 lampstands, right?
Yeah, 7 branch
Branch.
campstands.
7 spirits of God.
The 2 candles behind it are more there for practical reasons than anything else. They're brought out when we read the gospel. We always bring the light of Christ, so candles are brought out for most of their cases. There's the Yeah, there were a few reasons. One of them was that it could be more secure in a smaller building off to the side somewhere. So if
Oh, no, 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 in the original, was the
Yeah.
idea to actually make it a very deliberate trap.
Yes, but no, my point was that by having it elsewhere, that place could be more secure than the church proper, which is
Oh.
open all the time. So that when authorities came in, theoretically, there were only the gifts, which were the super illegal part, on the altar for the duration of the time they absolutely needed to be there, and the rest of the time they were held in a separate building. No, it's just where we keep bread and some wine. It's over there.
Yeah.
Just,
So during the liturgy, someone puts a candle, I'm sorry guys. They put a candle out here,
yeah.
and then it's just taken away and going, is that like kind of light of the world, or, I don't know about that.
That is entirely practical. Otherwise, the choir has no idea when to stop singing.
Okay.
It's just a signal of the choir that
Okay.
we're done with our stuff in here because the curtain's closed. You could wax poetical about it, sure, that sounds wonderful. The reality is, it is mostly just a signal of the choir that we're done.
Over
Interesting. There is certainly some pomp and circumstance here, but usually it has a reason, but every once in a while it's just a signal to someone else.
It's like this, the swisher over some of the bread or something, just keep the flies away.
Yes. Yep. Other questions? This might be the fastest church tour I've ever done. You guys, usually there's loads of questions.
Usually you need to have a blessing before you come up here, right? Or inside?
Yeah, so, yeah, I didn't really talk about that as much this time, I suppose. You will see people when they enter both the narthex and the nave making 3 crosses, or acclamations, bows, whatever we call that, making the Sunday cross. Venerating the icon. Yes, to come in this space, you need a blessing from the priest and or bishop, well, or bishop, if he's present. And I will absolutely kick people out if they have no reason to be in here. The only reason you are ever in here is because there's a purpose to you being in here. Sometimes incorrectly, people think that this is a place that only men can enter, and I would ask the question or impact. So, what happens at a women's monastery then? Women go in the altar because they're the ones that are there that are able to serve and able to clean and whatnot. And who did they get their blessing from to do that? The abbess, because it's her parish, unless the bishop is present. So, yes, anyone who has a particular reason and blessing to be in here can, for practical purposes and historical ones. Most of the time these days it's just men, but it's not like there's some canon or rule or law that demands that. The other thing which you may have noticed when I came in, if you were paying attention, is I did prostrations before the altar. So you start by doing that and then get your blessing for being in the space. If you are clergy, you venerate the altar itself. If you're not, then you do not touch that table ever. Which makes it very impactful the first time when you're ordained to actually touch the table. It feels weird.
Yeah, I was gonna
table with the in the back.
That's the altar.
That's the altar, and the person in the circle.
It's one of the angels again, depicted, like I said, with the
Oh, it's the cherubim. It's the throne card. Okay, all right.
to the government, to the other faces to the flying. Oh, that's the 6 wings.
Did we cover the red one in the back too far? That one right in front?
Oh, yeah, no one's asked this time, but yes.
Yeah.
That is there for, I would have said practical reasons, except that now I have another one that's in much better condition. That is used during our Paschal services. We will build a little tomb out there, you'll see when we get to the end of Lent, and that is brought out and set on it. Except, again, like I said, we have one that's in better condition now, it's a very old one. So it lives there. It's basically just and the little table off to the very side that you saw, so I got some little tables with books and stuff off to the side, but trying to keep the space tidy and as mostly clear as we can.
I saw one, I think it was, I don't know if but is the candle before the gospel when it comes out, is that supposed to represent St. John the Forerunner? So the little entrance.
Sure. That sounds like something someone might have written. That sounds to me like assigning a reason to the candle that's out before communion. More so I would say we have candles going out with all of our entrances, because we bring the light of Christ with us. But, I could, sure, that sounds like something that some saint probably wrote a big, long treatise about. Yeah.
And another practical one, I always wonder too, now that I think about it, what's the difference of lighting a candle for those compared to obviously lighting one next to Christ or the Theotokos or a saint?
What do you mean those?
The two spots or the structures over, like for a feast or whatever, like what's the difference if somebody lit a candle for these compared to obviously one next to the
I
saint
see.
of Christ?
Yeah. So like two of our saints here in North America, St. Nicholas is a very popular saint, and then Christ the Theotokos, and then we're remembering in the middle. People will often say a prayer to whomever is depicted in the icon, and then light a candle and put it there next to their icon. So it's about whomever you said the prayer to when you lit the candle. And then, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the square one over there in front of the icon in the Slavic practice, that's sometimes called the memorial table. So people will say prayers for departed over there for those candles. No one's gonna say something if you're not saying prayers for the departed there, but that is what most people will be doing when lighting those candles.
When we're praying at the icons, it's an intercession, or is it we're actually like praying to them for them to pray?
I'm not sure the distinction between the two options you just provided.
Are they the same?
In our mind, yes. I mean, when you ask someone to save you and you're drowning, the expectation is that they're going to go, no, only God can save you, or they're going to throw you the life vest.
Yeah.
Glory to God, there's a life vest right here.
Mm.
Probably that one. At least I hope,
Yeah.
for your sake.
Yeah.
So yes, they will certainly do, saints will certainly do whatever they can, which usually is interceding on our behalf.
Can you explain what makes up a relic?
Sure. All right, are we done in this space? I can close it up and keep going in this space. Okay. Yes. You don't have to go down. You can come over here and I'll show you the relic. It's not like there's something hidden or whatever. We bring her relic down on her feast day, so you'll see July 24th. invest them every so often in that process. Or sometimes if the relics are transferred from one city to another, something like that, a bunch of jostling, things can fall off, and those are collected and distributed as relics. So there's never an active, there's rarely an active intervention to get a relic. The exception to that is sometimes you'll read about some invading force that tried to dispose of the relics of the saints there. So they may be more aggressive than we would, but
No violence.
This is a random question, but can there be another St. Christine Orthodox Church as
Yep.
part of? Oh, okay. And is there? Is there one?
not in the northern hemisphere, to my knowledge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she's, for whatever reason, not a very popular saint, so,
Oh, okay.
but,
Really?
no, thanks here.
Me personally, I looked at her history, and it's like, she has to be here. She was supposedly a pagan princess, a priestess, and then what do we have? A whole bunch of Hindus here. That's what I'm looking at,
Yeah, so, I mean, I couldn't tell you why specifically she was chosen. I don't know that story, but she was. There are, I don't even know how many parishes of Saints Cyril and Methodius, or Peter and Paul, or St. John. So, yeah.
And they all have like, sorry, the multiple ones have like a relic of that saint too, like they all have bits and pieces of, that's just a random thought that came to me.
It is not uncommon, but presumably not all of them, yeah. There are a finite number of them, one would expect, so,
Yeah.
yeah. Every church will have some collection of relics, though, whether or not they do stuff there.
We have a,
We also have the relic of St. Herman here.
Czechoslovakia, there was a Cyril Methodius, and they had the relics of the vestments. This is when the big had a fire
Yeah.
and they,
I will say for the vestments, sometimes when they change vestments, those older vestments that were on the body will be distributed as, or clothing or whatever it is for the person will be distributed as stuff as well. All right, well, I think that's more or less the end. Are there any final questions here as we conclude? So.
as far as the case, when you're proceeding around with the chalice and all that, and someone grabbed either your robe or Father George's robe and kissed it as a veneration.
That is, I associate that as more of a Byzantine thing. I've seen it, but apparently in like maybe someone said Romania or something, it's very common as well. So it's a cultural thing. Well, I talk about the woman with an issue of blood touching the hem of the garment, right? So as he walked through the crowd. Right. So.
So in that, we are an icon of Christ. Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes, the Slavic vestments I particularly like in that regard because they block me. You can tell there is a person, a priest, standing there, but it isn't really important who exactly that person is. You're not here because of me. You're here because the church is here, worshiping together where two or three are gathered. Right? So it isn't me that matters. It's that there is a priest. So it makes it less obvious who is actually standing up there.
Thank you.